Welcome to
Hello.
Ground Game Live. How you doing, Rachel?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. So I guess the main thing that's happening tonight, there's a lot of stuff
So many.
happening, but the NBA, it looks like their season is done. It looks like the Bucks saying we're not going to play because of the shootings in Kenosha and then the
hmm
uprising that happened out of that has spurred the rest of the league to say, you know what, we're going to walk off too.
Absolutely. The Lakers and the Clippers both just voted to strike and end their season. So I have personally not seen anything like this from the NBA before. I don't know about you.
No, I mean it's
Wild.
pretty unprecedented, though obviously we are living in unprecedented times. But it was weird when I saw them say, "Oh, we're just going to move to Orlando temporarily and still make the rest of you play." Like nothing about that sat well with me.
No, yeah, the first one of the first images I saw, I forgot which player it was, but just head to toe white like outfit, gloves, mask, everything. And that was when I was like, okay, like I like sports. I'm a viewer. I'm not like a super fan or anything, but that did not sit well for me. And I know that a lot of people are probably not happy with me saying that. My partner in particular, who is a basketball super fan, but it is weird, like to force people to entertain us who are mostly people of color, mostly Black, and we're living through an uprising that is all about racial equality and inequality in this country. And we're just going to pretend like everything is normal and fine because the NBA and MLB and the NFL want to make money. Like,
and even beyond the players, like having them be put up at Disney hotels means that Disney staff is cleaning those rooms, is servicing them. Like the food has to come from somewhere and has to be delivered by someone. So there are all these low-wage Disney workers who are suddenly finding themselves compelled to work during a pandemic in order to service the billionaires who own the teams. Like ultimately, that's who's making the money here. Even the NBA players, like they've got their salary and obviously they're paid very, very well, but none of the NBA owners were down there sequestering with them. They weren't putting themselves at that kind of risk.
Right. Were they out there on the courts? Were they sanitizing after every single player? No. Like, you're absolutely right. They weren't putting themselves in danger, which is what we were asking all of those workers to do.
No, it's kind of nuts. And it's something we saw here with the retail opening that we talked about a little bit, where everyone has been in such a rush to like get back to normal, whatever that means, that it doesn't matter who gets put on the line. And we keep having to like shut down, and we keep finding out that these experiments to like rush us towards reopening are just never going to work.
Yeah, and like and putting on sports shows to make everyone feel better, make everything feel normal is counterproductive. It also is not going to work, and it's just frustrating. I would imagine as players to be questioned about what's going on in the country when you can't do anything about it. Like you're forced to be at work, which is playing a game, and you're going to sit there and insult me after the game and ask me how I feel. Like I would be infuriated if I was these players because like they are the ones who would get pulled over if the cop didn't know who they were and didn't recognize them on first glance. Like they look like the people who are being shot. They look like the people who are being killed. And to ask them how they feel, like, how do you think I feel? Like,
and I think it's also, we really need to point out, this is being called a boycott in a lot of the media. It's not a boycott. You can't boycott your job. You're going on strike. But this is also a wildcat strike. Like the contract that the players union has signed with the NBA says that they can't go on strike like this, but the players are doing it anyways. And that's what's kind of amazing is we've seen wildcat strikes from teachers unions now to the NBA players union beginning to take off across this country and get real tangible change. And that's so inspiring to me because we keep being told, especially in the labor movement, well, you have to wait, you have to do this the right way, you have to make sure that you're not disrupting the economy as you fight for your rights. And it's like, you know what, maybe disrupting the economy is the way we get our rights. Maybe that's why you keep telling us not to do that.
Yep, exactly. And I hope that the players also begin to speak about it in those terms. Like there are so many workers that could benefit from this. Like I forgot who tweeted it today, but just the idea was that everyone, like malls would shut down if people didn't go to work at the retail jobs. Like, and that's what we need to start encouraging because we need to take the power out of the money because the only thing the US listens to is capital. And workers control that. like if we don't show up to those stores, they're not making money. They aren't selling
Yeah.
clothes. They aren't selling products. And that is because of those low wage workers and the hourly workers that are keeping the economy afloat, who were
Yeah.
completely forgotten about and disrespected throughout the first 3 months of the lockdown.
Yeah, and I think it's on a day like today where Jeff Bezos has apparently crossed the line for being the wealthiest person ever, worth over $200 billion. We're going to be talking to some tenants' rights activists about what's been going on all around the city in terms of trying to keep people in their homes and protecting them once they've actually gotten evicted from their homes and are suffering on the streets of LA. So we're going to start with our NOC correspondent, Bailey, who was out at an action resisting an eviction last week. So let's get into that combo. Hey, Bailey, how are you doing?
Bailey.
What? Hi, good. How are you? Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming. So I guess to get us started, kind of lay out what was going on with this Law 2 action that you were reporting on, and just kind of like the baseline for what went down.
Right. So a tenant named Dan has been living in his unit for about 20 years. He accidentally missed a month of rent and didn't realize it. It was like some sort of, automatic payment setup. And instead of letting him know, saying like what happened here, he says he's paid on time for all 20 years. So instead of saying like, what happened, you missed a month of rent, he was just served an eviction notice. And in 2007, the woman who owned Dan's building died, and it was then, bought by a corporate owner. So essentially his unit is subject to rent control. And so he's paying far below the market price. So, he kind of sees it as an opportunity for this, company to evict him and then jack up the price once they've, kicked him out and essentially made him homeless. So Law 2 is organizing to prevent him from being kicked out of his home and to just create a sheriff's blockade and also to spread awareness to fellow tenants in the neighborhood.
Wow, I can't believe that. Bailey, is that legal? Like, just for folks who might not know, if you live in a rent-controlled unit and you leave, the landlord is allowed to jack up the price. Is that correct?
I believe so. So I know that if the tenant is in that unit, they can only increase it by it's not a set percentage. It's subject.
It's the price, basically the cost of inflation. So it's been about 3.5% for like the last 2 decades, and then this year inflation jumped a little bit, so it jumped up to 4%.
Right. So they can only increase the rent that much per year. Of course, when he moves out, they can increase it to essentially a market rate, which is for that area around $2,000, over $2,000 for one bedroom in that area. And I don't know exactly how much Dan was paying, but I know that it was far below that price.
Now, when we're talking about this sort of like resistance to an eviction, what does that mean? Like, what were the organizers from Law 2 on the ground there to do?
Yeah, so I thought this was a really interesting conversation to have with a lot of Law 2 organizers, because I think that Law 2 is very realistic that, it's unlikely that organizers are going to prevent the sheriffs from actually kicking someone out of their home. Like, that's obviously the ultimate goal. But at the end of the day, as we all know, the sheriffs are, vastly overfunded and have all this military-grade equipment. They can sort of do whatever they want. But landlords basically pay sheriffs to assist with evictions. So one of the points that a Law 2 organizer named Colin made is that if we can do anything to prevent these evictions in any small way, it ends up costing the landlords more. So we just want it to be as costly and as time-consuming to evict someone as possible, and then also to inspire fellow tenants to organize in their area. And also the sheriffs didn't show up that day, which it's hard to attribute that to the presence of organizers. There's no explicit statement. But one of our reporters did cover an eviction blockade the next day and said that the sheriff's department did tell them that because of the presence of organizers, they delayed the eviction. And that tenant got, I believe, another week or 2 weeks to move out. So obviously it's not the ideal outcome, but it is, it's gumming up the system, as Colin put it. It's gumming up the system, and also showing people and showing politicians and landlords that we're not just going to sit idly by while this happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what was the neighbors' response to this? Are they, like, I imagine they understand that they're probably under threat of being evicted, that a lot of their neighbors are under threat of being evicted. Were they expecting this sort of response? How did they react to this?
It sounds like there was they were very surprised that this was happening. I think partially because there's this expectation that evictions have been stayed essentially until courts reopen on the 2nd, when about over 300,000 people are going to be facing eviction and homelessness in LA.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, the sheriff's department just wasn't carrying out evictions that had gone through the courts pre-COVID, and they just started again. So neighbors were surprised on that level, just that even evictions were being carried out. But also they were very supportive. Like Law 2 put up a lot of signs and did a lot of chalking, as you can see from that photo, along the streets, just raising awareness. And a lot of neighbors did drive by with fists raised and honking in support. So that was really cool to see. Yeah.
How many of these eviction blockades have you been doing in your local, or just like throughout Law 2 in general? Is this something that's been slowly growing over the last few weeks? Obviously, we'll probably see more come September. But can you tell me about like the volume of these actions?
I think I'm seeing at least 3 or 4 per week. The way Law 2 works is based on area. So certain areas don't have information about other eviction blockades all the time. But online, I am seeing I would say about 4 or so per week. So I think that's because the sheriff's house started carrying out those evictions from cases that went through the courts pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So we've really only seen that in probably the last couple weeks or so.
And do you know what Law 2's plans are going forward? Because obviously September 1st is coming up. We don't really have real eviction protections in the state or the city of Los Angeles, though Sacramento is debating some terrible, terrible legislation, as is our own city council. What are we going to do to keep our communities safe?
It sounds like, I think that we saw this. There was an action last week where there was a court blockade, which was pretty incredible. I think we'll probably be seeing more of those. And then also, I think hopefully as Law 2 organizes more in these coming weeks and gets out there and shows people like we are here to organize, we are here to protect our neighbors, that those eviction blockades will hopefully grow and become more locally organized as well. So I think we'll be seeing a lot more of those actions in the coming weeks. Yeah.
And for folks who want to get involved, like how can they best hook up with Law 2? What if there's not a chapter in their immediate area?
So you can go to LA Tenants Union. I don't know their website, but I know if you Google it, it'll show up immediately. So you can look into that. I think it's really helpful to join LA Tenants Union, just to be a part of that organization. But otherwise, you can organize with your tenants in your neighborhood locally, and just get as much manpower and awareness out there as possible. I know that not everyone really has the opportunity to join Law 2. So I think, and one of Law 2's stated goals is just to get people organized in their areas. It's not necessary even to join Law 2. So I think just reaching out to our neighbors, speaking to our neighbors, really getting in touch with them, and protecting one another to the best of our ability.
And it's latenantsunion.org if you want to check it out. They've got great information on the locals that are around, as well as a bunch of like resources and handbooks that you can draw on. I know when this first started, I was passing out a lot of the letters that Law 2 had drafted to send to your landlord to explain why you weren't paying rent for those months. A lot of like really good information that you can pass around, print out, email to your friends and family, like just spread this stuff around as much as you can. Just latenantsunion.org.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, Bailey, and thank you for the reporting you're doing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. This was amazing.
Yeah, it's fun.
Awesome.
Nice.
Oof. I love information about Latu. They've been doing so much great work, just in general in the city, but also during this pandemic.
Yes.
Have really, really helped a lot of people out, and they've grown so much because of it. And our next guest is one of their most recent organizers, specifically for this reason. We have Paisley up next to chat with us about Latu as well, and also an action that happened today. Hey, Paisley, what's up?
Hey, y'all. Good to see you.
Thank you for thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for having me. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah.
So you were out at. Oh yeah, go ahead, Rachel. Sorry.
Sorry. No. Yeah. I mean, you were about to intro it. I will let you intro it.
Oh, well, I was going to say, so we're jumping from one action to another. This was an action today in coordination with Street Watch LA, which is a group that watches encampment sweeps and tries to hold the police accountable in that. Tell us a little bit what was happening and fill us in on the Schrader Special Enforcement Zone, because that was the focus of this action, right?
Yeah, I'm to be quite transparent, I don't have a ton of information specifically on the Schrader Special Enforcement Zone. I believe that basically what has been happening is kind of akin to what has been going on with the evictions, is that street sweeps have, due to COVID, are technically illegal, but they have recently started doing sweeps in special enforcement cleaning zones, SEXZ zones. So today, I just know, basically, I mean, it kind of in a similar vein to like these eviction blockades. It's like these things just kind of come up, and you're just like, you get notified within your network of like, hey, tomorrow at 6 a.m. we're doing this, so show up. And I was like, okay. So I got there a little later. I got there maybe about after 8. So they had already kind of, a group of folks had already, I think, addressed a sweep that was going on. And what I kind of gleaned from the organizers within Street Watch, who had been to more of these, sweep defense actions, is that generally within Street Watch, there's like maybe 2 or 4 organizers that show up. And so when you show up to a sweep, the cops are there. They'll have tape. They'll tape off the kind of the area where like the unhoused folks are at, and the sanitation people will give them, I believe, like 15 minutes to like clear out their stuff. And if they refuse to move or anything that gets left behind, they basically just bulldoze and just destroy other things. So within the past, because there's only been a couple organizers, they really just document, because this is technically, again, the sweeps aren't supposed to be happening. So they're like building a lawsuit. So they take a lot of video and they, try to just document and support after the fact. But today, because there was a bigger group of us, at one point when I had shown up, some of the organizers had come to an agreement with the sanitation people and the cops. They said, hey, look, these people don't want to move. You cleaned this half of the sidewalk. They don't want to move their stuff. So they're like, okay, we'll spot clean around them. We're not going to power wash the whole sidewalk. They don't have to move. And so then we remained on our side of the tape, and it was fine. And then we started seeing sanitation workers talking to some of the people out there, and like you can see that they were like, we couldn't really hear what they were saying, but they started to move their stuff, and we're like, what's going on? And they started talking to people in the tents and trying to get them out. And so then we're like, you guys broke your side of the deal. We're not going to stay behind this tape. We moved the tape and then blocked the tents. And they're like, oh, we're not going to take the tents. We're not going to take the tents. And so then they move on. And then the rest of the morning was more or less trying to get ahead of them. We went to another location. We got there before them and managed to put our own tape up and kind of tape it off. And so then the cops show up there and they're like, oh, we need to take this down so that they can clean it. And like, we'll clean it. So, we had organizers out there, put some gloves on and picking up, talking to the people out there, being like, what do you want me to throw away? Right. Because a lot of times they'll just come in and be like, this is all garbage, or they're looking for things like needles or whatever they're trying to find to try to incriminate people or try to like justify destroying, people who like already don't have a roof over their heads. It's just like the few belongings that they have. They're like, let's just take all of that away. So that was definitely my, my first time going to an action like this. I've personally been to like a lot of the eviction blockade and lockout blockades and things. But yeah, it was definitely, I think, talking to the people who had been to others, they said that it felt nice to at least, have that people power. And that's kind of a big thing that I am newer to organizing with Latu. And organizing in general, but that's been like the biggest sort of like game changer for me, was being able to see that, with enough people, you can accomplish anything. And then I think to the point Bailey was making, when it comes to things like, legal evictions, it's like you need a lot of people because you're going up against quite, an adversary.
Thank you for all of that background. It was harrowing and scary to be following these sweeps on social media this morning from like 6 a.m. to noon, because it sounded to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, there were like 3 different sweeps happening in that Hollywood area, kind of around Sunset and Highland. And watching the escalation, as you noted, right? Like they said they wouldn't do this, and then they did. And I watched a video of sanitation like taking down a tent. And that's something that we know that they do, that they're not supposed to do. And they regularly throw away people's belongings, as you said, their ID cards, their medication, photos, things that they own. Like those are their homes. And that's something that like I like to constantly talk about, and just always bring up, because I think it, like, I wouldn't be able to move all of my stuff at 6 a.m. if cops and random other people came into my room and told me to leave. And so I think it's like just the traumatic experience of that can never be overstated. And then just the constant harassing, the fact that the cops were even there. It's like, that's not what cops are for. And they're just there, they're there to terrorize people. So can you speak to any of that kind of like violence? Was there any violence that might have happened today from the cops or sanitation workers or anything like that?
I mean, I think, you know, the act of them being there in and of itself is, as you kind of touch upon, is the violence, you know. And I think that like there was I feel like as the public eye is on like the police force and things, they like are trying to be, I mean, I noticed this in some of the evictions as well, like, you know, the fact that they didn't show up. I think they try to avoid scenes if they can, you know, that especially when there's enough people watching and filming them, they're a little bit, obviously they still will kind of do whatever they want. I think something that I didn't see personally today, but heard from people, that some of the sanitation workers today and just that other sweeps were doing was it's the cavalier and like almost joy that some of the people like get. Like they're kind of like dancing around and like it's like no big deal what they're doing. And I think that like while there wasn't any like while I saw like, you know, no, there wasn't any like explicitly like violent or like aggressive behavior, it's in some ways like just that's, you know, worse in a lot of ways, right? Like to just like dance around and like smile while you are just like taking from, you know, and destroying, as you mentioned, someone's like entire life, is pretty appalling. And I think that, yeah, like it was definitely, there was a general census of, okay, there's really no negotiating with, you know, the police or the sanitation workers, like, cause they're just going to lie to us and they're going to tell us what they want to tell us one thing 1 second and then immediately do like the exact opposite of what they said. They're like, okay, we're not going to move them. And then the second you're not there or the second you like back down, then they start to move in. And I think that like to the point of there being multiple sweeps, it's like, that's where you're playing this like cat and mouse game of trying to like beat them and like get there and, you know, be able to be there. And I mean, a lot of times that's kind of what I've heard in terms, especially with our like unhoused like community. It's the fact that like a lot of times just showing up for them, you know, makes all the difference, because without that, the police have just like free reign to be as violent and, you know, harass as much as they want, because they just kind of assume like no one is going to hold them accountable or like check them or anything like that, right? They can just get away with it on like, you know, a very vulnerable population. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned earlier that you had been doing some of the eviction blockades, and I want you to talk about how those are connected, because I think in a lot of folks' minds, our unhoused population doesn't have a history. They just like popped into existence without a place to live and ended up in the public space. But that is not how somebody ends up in that position.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting to see in the blockades, and as well as, you know, I think Bailey kind of spoke of, within Lots, we were really boosting up our outreach efforts into the neighborhood. And so like this last Sunday, you know, our Hollywood local, we were just walking around Hollywood talking to neighbors, and I met somebody who is now unhoused, and she was an actress. And so she was talking about, and it was interesting to have this conversation because it was fresh for her. And you can see within, I mean, even some of the language of like, oh, here I thought that, you know, people were homeless because of like their own like problem. And I never thought I'd be begging on the side of a highway. So she still had like this mentality of like, I'm like, you know, better or whatever. But I think that it did show this point of, I feel like with COVID and everything kind of being in some ways a great equalizer of folks that who thought that they were like, you know, super secure and when there's their state in life, and that if you can't pay your rent, if you're on the street, then like you must have done something to like get there, or you must be like a drug addict or something, right? People just have all these assumptions and things that they make. And I think that what I'm seeing within folks who are facing eviction, because they really just like, they're like, I can't work. Like, how can I pay my rent? I can't work. I don't have any wages. And then they're faced with this sort of, looking at everything that they've kind of have believed up until this point about, what it means to, end up homeless, what it means to, pay your rent, not be able to pay your rent, the shame around that, right? Where it's like, I can't, and that's something that I noticed really early on in the pandemic, when people were getting their, extra $600 or their stimulus checks, and then immediately going and putting it towards rent when they couldn't, pay for medicine or food. So the union had a food not rent campaign where they're like, no, you should use your money for food and for medicine. We shouldn't spend almost all of your income on rent, which is what folks were already doing pre-pandemic, right?
Yeah. And so what do you see going forward with this? Like, do you think that these sort of sweep actions we're going to see less of these? We know that the city is already violating multiple court orders. They're still enforcing 5611. They're still allowing 311 calls to result in sweeps. What do you think we're going to have to do in order to like really make a difference here?
I mean, I know that there's a lot of pushing for like, converting hotels for housing, and trying to like, all these like empty apartment buildings. The thing is like, there's not a housing crisis, like there's not a lack of housing or built. There's all these empty apartment buildings, empty hotels. So I know that within Streetwatch and other organizations, there's definitely a push for that, for just like reclaiming these spaces, pushing for legislation. But like, I think that, that can sometimes be a slow burn. And I think that, because I don't think that the sweeps and things are gonna, I think it's just gonna get worse, right? They're all and that sort of pushes us into this place where it's like something's got to change, because the like system, the powers that be are gonna continue crushing down on us, and it's like, if the people don't rise up, then we're just gonna be crushed, right? And so that's sort of like, within organizing our neighbors, within like just standing up and like, showing up for each other, but as well as trying to think, bigger picture. It's like, well, what, like, a rent strike, is a great thing to do, but it's like, what are the demands attached to it? Like, what are we, trying to like, what's we know that the world we're in isn't the world we want to be in. So like, what does that world look like, and how could we get there at?
Yeah, exactly. We have to make sure that people understand that this is a political project, that the rent strike in and of itself is just one step down the road towards building the world that we want, that ultimately decommodified housing, access to safe and affordable, if that's within grasp, housing is what we want to be going to. And so, seeing things happening in council where council is still pushing this developer-centric model of like affordable housing doesn't displace the profit motive. And as long as profit is king, we're going to see LAPD deployed to protect that profit.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for like showing up there, Bailey. Like, it's really important that we get out there and put our bodies on the line and make sure that like we bear witness to this stuff. Like, to see one of these sweeps happen, it will change you as a person. They are violent, they are heartbreaking, and there are people who go out and do this almost every day, at least weekly. And those are folks that have more compassion and more passion for this than I do myself. And I just want to say we've all got the time to get out there and start making a difference in this way. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of course. Oh yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say, is that the thing is, it's like housing is a human right? Because it's like, I think this past like during the heat wave, I was like, oh, let me just get some like water bottles and freeze them and give them out, because it's super high, and I'm like high, and I have a house, or like an apartment, right? So it's like, I think that people don't realize that a little goes a long way, and if you can't get out there and like physically show up, or you're just like that's something that's a little bit too intense for you, you don't want to risk arrest or whatnot. I think what I've been telling folks is, it's like, even when you interact with people who are, like if they're asking for money or whatever it is, it's like, if you don't have anything to physically give, like just give them some time and give them like a human moment, and like just recognize that we're all people, and it's like not just like, okay, I can't, I'm in my car, like roll my window, So I think that goes a long way. And yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paisley. And we'll have you back. We're going to talk to Theo, and then we'll have you back to chat about this some more.
For sure.
Yeah, one thing we didn't get to talk about was there was a little bit of physical violence that went down between someone who just happened to have an Iron Cross tattoo. And some of the organizers that were there apparently drove his truck towards some people because they're blocking a road, and then got physical with people when they didn't want him to run into them with his truck. And that's something to keep in mind, is the danger isn't only from the police. There are a lot of people who have a weird mentality where defending people who are unhoused is somehow an affront to them, is somehow what they see as a criminal offense.
Right. Yeah. Like, it takes an entire society to uphold, like, exactly what we're seeing happen, like pro-policing, pro-commodification of housing. Like, it takes us as well. Like, we actually have to fight against other people who have internalized that mindset. Just like, you know, as Paisley mentioned, the actress, there's a lot of people who have internalized this mindset. And so we're also fighting to dismantle that mindset, as well as the police state and for-profit housing. So it's a lot of different fights.
Yeah, throw a brick at the cop in your head. But on that note, let's invite Theo Henderson on, host of We the Unhoused podcast and just all-around amazing organizer and activist. How are you doing tonight, Theo?
Hey, Theo.
Good evening. Thank you for having me back. I enjoyed this show very much. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. We're loving what you're laying down. I guess the first thing we wanted to talk about was Tiana Arata up in San Luis Obispo. I was hoping you could fill us in a little bit on that, because you did a really amazing podcast episode with her about that whole situation and like kind of the fallout we're seeing from her arrest.
Yes. Actually, I got with the Tiana situation by a happenstance, because I was covering another situation and someone reached out to me that watches We the Unhoused, and they asked me that to come down to San Luis Obispo and to look into the situation. And what I did, I found some very disturbing things, and I just as a full disclosure, I went back yesterday, and it gets even much more sinister. But when I initially got there, I had some uneasy feelings, because there is a mindset there. First of all, it reminds me of the movie Mississippi Burning. And there's a lot of people that believe that there's no racial animus there, and the happiest place on earth that Oprah Winfrey coined. And they believe that it was outside agitation that's coming in and stirring up and drumming up the Black people, because it feels like the Black people are not really upset about racial problems. So that was a bit disconcerting. And no surprise, when I started interviewing the people that are affected by racial incidents, of course, as I say, the cup runners over. And so I have been in communication with the people there, Tiana herself, and the message that's being sent there, because the message is really there, that if you protest against racial injustice, this is what's going to happen to you. That's really what this is about. And that's what the feeling is really there. They didn't like that their dirty laundry is aired. They felt one of the sheriffs stated that there's no racial problems. The only racism he gets is when he puts on his police uniform. There's members that are Tea Party activists and Trump supporters. And to take it to a step further, that when I went yesterday, it was like they have been exposed for the issues that is going on. And they just outright approached me and my video editor right off. Well, why are you here? I'm like, because they know I'm not from San Luis Obispo. And I got a mic and says, what do you think about the situation? And then they're trying to paint the picture that the protesters are criminals and they had harmed people, and they made it sound like, look at the whole video. But the thing with it is like, I noticed a difference when I was communicating with them. Conversely, when I was communicating with Black Lives Matter, they were much more peaceful, much more joyous. They had music things going. They had a higher turnout than the Trump pro-police group, because that's another thing about it. I asked them some pointed questions, which you will see in the second expose about it. I follow up with the first one. It's indicative, because it's a small town. It's a small, wealthy white town, particularly, and the allure is obviously the beaches and a different lifestyle that I could never afford. But it's also the undercurrent of it is there was one racial incident in one of the schools, and most of the people up in their positions of power have been telling people of color to dismiss it or ignore it or just basically not listen to them. And I found that to be true when I was trying to communicate with the Trump supporters that were there yelling and screaming at Tiana and her group of protesters and things of that nature, giving speeches and the like there.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. I have such a bone to pick with everybody who, that cop that said, like, well, with everyone in general. But with that cop that said, the only racism is when I put my uniform on. Like, you're not born a cop. You are not born with the uniform on. You're not born into this, like, inherent position of being a cop, right? Like, you can just not be a cop. And you can give up that power if you'd like to, but Black people can't not be Black, and brown people can't not be brown, and this is not something that we can just decide to not be. And it doesn't surprise me that a place like San Luis Obispo, just white people who live there are just so shocked that not everyone is having this like rosy time and enjoying the beach. That's wild. But I mean, like, power to you for going up there and asking people about that, because I don't know that I would have the stomach to do that myself without getting really upset and in people's faces. And that's why I just appreciate the work that you do in general to just uplift these stories and these voices now throughout the state, which is really cool.
Thank you very much. I find the intersection very interesting because as well as with Tiana, of course, she's Black as like I am, as well as the intersection with Paisley was talking about, because my podcast definitely deals with We the Unhoused, but there's a distinct intersection there that I need to call out and state is the fact that is white supremacy. And white supremacy affects all of us, even white people, if you must understand, is that we are in a capitalistic white supremacist society. And we're affected by different levels, to be sure, but the main end result is to displace, cause harm, and to divide us in such a way that we feel that the person that is being oppressed is at the fault instead of the people that we need to hold us accountable, like the systems that are in place to create such an environment.
So how is your project working to do that specifically? Because I think there's a lot of nuance and creative ways to do this kind of micro-political resistance. So how do you see yourself entering into that?
I do it through several prongs. The first thing, of course, We the Unhoused, from the perspective of being an unhoused, I believe is very, very important from hearing it from the unhoused point of view. There's always people that can talk about it from the outside, but I have 7 years plus of lived experience. I know the intricacies. I know what police harassment is like. I know what it's like to have a few minutes and have your things tossed. I know what it's like to be in the hospital, come back, and all your things are gone, and you're having to start over several times. And conversely, I also use it in other mediums too to open doors. For example, Flashing is an excellent cartoonist that I have been collaborating with, and we are touching on different issues. Like, for example, the third one should be out next month, but the second one, I was talking about what police violence looked like from the unhoused perspective. And I say that in the respect of unhoused vigilantism. And when I deal with unhoused vigilantism, because of the fact that people don't like unhoused people. They believe unhoused people get free stuff. They are loafers. They are the detritus of society. And they feel that they deserve anything that got coming to them. Conversely, the same thing with Black people. If a guy is looking for it, going into his car to check on his kids, after reporting 2 women fighting, he gets shot in the back, he deserved it because he didn't follow the commands. He wasn't under arrest. He was the Samaritan calling because of a disturbance. But we can't get past that idea. Conversely, when I was attacked by 3 white drunken housed people, the unhoused community cannot really get the justice that they need because we are looked on as criminals. And they are, they're dismissed and they're asking stupid questions like, did I get the license plate number? Or, do I know the person's name? I'm getting attacked. I didn't stop and ask them, what's your name? Let me get your social security number. And these ludicrous kind of conversational points that they ask in order for them to really not really file the report. And then by the time that they do, it's so half measured and it's so half assed. But consider the fact that they have a 311 call number for them to attack you And if they get pissed off and jump the gun, they could call 311 on you as an unhoused member and go to jail. But there's no 311 for unhoused members. There's only 211 for non-existent services.
Yeah.
So those are the intricacies and nuances that are not always understood by the major populace.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, that's true. Like the ways in which we just allow unhoused people to be policed by, you know, everyday citizens is the same with Black people. Like, look at George Zimmerman, or look at the person today who drove his car into people trying to help unhoused people. Like, again, it's like an entire society has to be lifting up these ideals in order for them to continue existing. And as you said earlier, it's easy for us to maintain that order by punching down than actually realizing that we are being controlled by white supremacy and capitalism. And we can dismantle it though, right? And like, that's what I love so much about your podcast, is that like we have the power in many ways to dismantle these systems, and just to not be cops in our heads, as Tim said earlier. Like, don't have that mental cop up there.
If I may add further, if time permits, we need to break down the deification of police officers and the demonization of unhoused people. Life happens to everybody. There's no one that lives a perfect life. There are people there that, like for me, like I got ill and I couldn't pay my rent, and this was before the LA Tenants Union and all that, where I took the opportunity to support myself with food and medication. But unfortunately, we didn't have a pre-COVID-19, and we had a Great Recession. So those nasty ingredients made a horrible stew that I had to navigate myself out of in some different some choppy waters. So my time in being unhoused was made considerably harder because people deify police officers. People believe point blank, period. If they say this guy is a problem, they'll believe it, or this guy is a danger to the children or old people, or they have no reasons to question it. Or if they say he has a record, but what's that record? He had a jaywalking ticket, but no one really wants to investigate it because it builds into the idea that he's this criminal that's out there to just jump out at hardworking people. And the narrative has to change in the respect that we have to stop this deification that we have of police officers. And when we hear the people say that not all police officers are bad, we are not talking about individual people. We're talking about a system where those so-called good officers will stand by and watch another unhoused person get beat up by Officer Frank Hernandez and didn't say anything. It didn't pull him off of him. That's that good officer that you keep talking about. It was that good officer is the good officers that stood by and watched this guy get shot 7 times going to his car where his kids are. That good officer that kicked in that door and blew the brains out of a 7-year-old laying in bed. That good officer that had a no-knock warrant and jumped and kicked in the door and shot and killed people that had legal right to be in their house and had legal right to have a firearm, that legal right to defend themselves, and he be arrested, her boyfriend arrested, and Breonna Taylor is allowed to die or bleed out in her own home because the idea that because you may have broken the law or criminal, you should be meted out vigilante justice right then and there. That's the problem.
Yeah. And so what do you want to see changed in the way that the city is conducting these like different sweeps that they're doing and the different kind of cleanings that they're doing? Like, as we transition into our group conversation, what do you imagine is like an alternative to what we're doing now?
I think we need to do a very major, and city, state, and country, and the most stuff. We need to, first of all, end all the sweeps. Let's stop. Let's not kid ourselves, because we need to be having a deep educational transition or a paradigm shift about the state of houselessness. And for once and for all, the city should be stopping the nonsense of and listening to developers and listening to these nasty NIMBYs about unhoused people, and to understand that you are not going to live like you're in Taj Mahal if you're living out on the street. And some of those things that they need are just like what other human beings have. And we have to understand that we have to get rid of some of the enforcement zone actions that we do. The second thing we have to do is we have to stop not only with affordable housing, but we need to cut out on this high damn rent, because people that are living in their houses are housed insecure too. And they may be a level or maybe a bad break or a bad medical emergency. They may be out on the street themselves. So, and this is not stopping by weak measures by Mitchell Farrell or Nuri Martinez, who proclaims to be sympathetic, but they won't call the task these NIMBYs. They won't call the task the developers. They won't call the task any of them. But the minute that 311 number comes, here we got a whole, like when they came to sweep me out of the park, it was over 15 staff members, and it cost over $5,000 for one sweep. So, but yet we keep giving billions of dollars and over 50-something% of the budget, and we get another damn police officer who has no lived experience and doesn't know anything about being unhoused. Why do we need cops to be policing us and holding our hands when we need to change the system? That's ridiculous. I don't understand that.
Yeah. Well, let's pull in Bailey, and we'll keep this conversation going, because I think you're banging on some really, really true points here. Hey, how's it going? Paisley, welcome back.
Hey, good to be back.
So what I want to start the conversation off on is talking about the way that we as housed people can work with the unhoused and how we can strategize to work together as we make it through this transition period and getting everyone to housing. Yeah, either one of you that take it. We're just kind of going to
I didn't want to be rude, but go ahead, Paisley, if you don't have anything, because I can add on. I've been talking enough.
I mean, I think that, for some of what I was saying earlier, I think that a lot of times, there's a few things for like housed folks, right? I think that and a lot of this has been touched upon. I mean, changing the way in which we think about the unhoused population and what, and recognizing that, I am one medical bill away from, obviously there's I'm not getting evicted currently, but I'm, we're all most of us, I should say, are way closer than we realize, a couple of checks away, if that, right? And I think, again, COVID made more people realize that. And I think, but the more that folks can really break out of if it doesn't affect me, then it isn't real, it's not happening, or it's not my problem. I think that's a big shift that needs to happen, right? If that, what happens to your neighbor does affect you, first of all, but also you should also just care even if it doesn't affect you directly, but really it does, I think, and I think the pending, wave of evictions and an increase in people that are going to be unhoused is going to make people realize that. So it's I'm hoping we're able to get ahead of that and prevent that from happening. But whether we are, or whether people are just start to see it for themselves, I mean, they're gonna a reckoning is coming. People are gonna have to wake up to what's going on and recognize to Theo's point that the deification of police and the demonization or criminalization of folks that don't have that, instead of thinking of it's what happened, how can we fail so many people, how does the system fail such so many folks, it's what did you do to get there? You deserve that.
I have to add a few more points as well as too. It's also the notion out there of worthy and unworthy housing. We have to break that cycle. For example, there are some unhoused people, and that believes that they shouldn't be targeted. But those other unhoused people that do substance usage or have mental maladies, they should be targeted. And that's very harmful for all of us, because recently I just read an article about a high drug usage that people are having overdoses that are housed. And so, there's no one calling 311 for them. There's no one arresting them because they're on substance usage. There's a much more of a coddling and much more of an understanding note that is given out to them. The second thing is for us as citizenry, we have to realize what part did we play into this. One is part of it is, did we ingest the educational tools and methods that our city has put out for us? We call out for things like parking. We call out for the environment. We call out for our pets. We want pet places. But when it comes to human suffering and human understanding, we are usually decidedly have been very silent on it. And it's because we are a blaming and shaming society. We get ours if we scrabble of it, and we see someone that may get a helping hand, we get resentful. Well, I worked hard all my life and no one gave me anything. The unhoused people get free stuff. Why did and which is a problem in itself, because We all have gotten help despite the belief system of it, because you did not just come off through osmosis and just become successful unless you had parents that were very wealthy. The system of this country was in place. My ancestors helped for many people to get the circuits, the things that you can get easily with a lot of ease, and they work for damn free. So you're talking about lazy. That's not the argument that we should be talking about. But the issue is that as a community from housed and unhoused, we need to work on our education, what it really means to be unhoused and the facets of it. There's more to us than just outside on encampments. There are people that are unhoused in their cars. There are people that are unhoused in flea motels. There are people that are couch committee. There are people that, because I've done several different ones. I lived on a fire escape. I squatted in a building. I've lived in a garbage can. I lived behind the garbage can. I lived in front of the garbage can. I lived in a park. I lived in a bridge. I lived in the alley. I lived in the ocean. I lived every facet of unhoused, and on the bus, the train. I would say I lived on the moon, but that would be impossible to do. But the point is that there's every facet of houselessness that there is, that we have to understand that this is not going to go away by keep criminalizing and finger pointing. We have to learn and say, you know what, human emotion, human conditions should not preclude someone to lose their home and punishing them to living out under a bridge in fear because someone thinking about their precious children. There are unhoused families that are in hiding and are afraid to get the help because they have been threatened by those same deified police that they're going to separate their families and put them in CPS. So, how is that helping? That is not helping at all. So they have children too. So you're insinuating that when you're afraid about your children, but you don't give a damn about their families and their kids living out on a cardboard condominium. So let's be real.
Yeah. I mean, that last statement really reminded me of something. I live down the street from Telfair Elementary. And at one point, I think like a year or two ago, 25% of the school, those students who are K to fifth grade, had unstable housing and were living in cars, living in other family members' homes. So yeah, like I completely agree with you, right? Like we can fight so hard for like protecting kids from like seeing unhoused people, and like protect our jobs from undocumented people, right? It's the same exact language about both groups. But all of these issues, like everybody wants to feel safe, everybody wants to be housed, everybody wants clean water and healthcare, not just people who are housed. Like we need to extend that grace. And part of that takes breaking down the like individualistic mindset that like we are taught in the US. Like we are taught, as you mentioned earlier, that like you get what you deserve, you work for what you want and what you have. And that's not helpful. And I agree with what has already been said before. Like, I think COVID is really helping people to make those connections. Like none of us invented the virus. Like I lost my job through no fault of my own. Like
exactly.
So it's just wild, and it's like it was another reminder for me that I was one paycheck away from being unhoused, not being able to pay my student loans. Like the fact that all of these things got frozen for me, and as you said, after 2008, like we didn't get that same lifeline. So yeah, you just brought up a lot for me, both of you.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask, as we're kind of getting here towards the close of our show, obviously the only way to save ourselves is electoral politics. I'm kidding, but I am wearing my Nithya shirt. So I did want to talk about this because we are facing a crisis in the post office, and we're facing a wave of evictions where people may end up out of their addresses where they're registered to vote, but still want their votes counted, their voices heard. What can we do to make sure that those people can exercise those rights while we are still staying out in the street?
I mean, I know there are definitely, I think within Latu and I mean, a lot of these things are like cross, a lot of these groups and people within them, right, they do some cross things. So I myself haven't personally been super involved, but I mean, being out in protests, you see people are constantly helping people register to vote. But I know, for instance, like, I mean, even the company that I work for is like a post-production company, and they're trying to like, there's a lot of businesses that are setting up like independent stations that we can like drop off stations and that kind of thing. So I think it's something that I know the conversations are being had and people are mindful of, despite like obvious, there's, you know, a whole array of opinions on electoral politics, but it is what it is. And, you know, ideally you get as many people out to vote that want to, right? Anybody who wants to vote should have that ability to. And I think recognizing what the current administration is doing to try to make that as difficult as possible, there's definitely a push for folks that are going out in the neighborhoods and that are getting into the communities to make sure that we can kind of combat that effort to like stifle and silence people's votes.
Yeah.
Well,
and Theo, what can we do to help the unhoused?
Well, that's what I would suggest, because one of the things I would suggest, because the unhoused community are not have access enough to charging their phones, but I would help them, teach them, actually give them what we're doing, like an Echo Park power up and having them vote electronically, or if we can designate where people can have their own phones and help them vote for them on their phones to help get that. It's like, as you can believe, like there's slices of society in the unhoused community that is very active in politics. There's some that has been beaten down, just like this, basically the microcosm of society. But the major pushes should be that right now, we had a program where we had people driving them to the voting location, but you know, that's up in the air due to COVID. So that's got maybe going to be most efficient. So I think we're teaching or getting phones ready for them to be able to phone electronically. That's what I think. Even actually, I think the House Society should be doing that too. I don't think they should be worried about doing mail-in votes. Just do it electronically. That will stop the ridiculousness of President Trump. So
yeah. And I know the Postal Service filed a patent on a blockchain for voting, so we might see that this election.
I have one last electoral related question, actually, before we go. Our beloved Mayor Eric Garcetti, thumbs up, thumbs down, Biden HUD secretary. That is what is being floated.
Yeah, I have heard that.
I had too, but I'm still thinking that's a bad joke. Again, you know, I mean, what in the world? Why? Who in their right mind would hire this guy while he sat by and let this council members upend people's lives? I have no idea, but just, you know, it won't be getting my vote, so don't not to worry about that. You know,
2 thumbs up. I'm just kidding. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Definitely
No, I'm torn because on the one hand he'll be leaving LA, but on another hand we have a lot of public housing and people who are in like vulnerable housing situations that HUD is supposed to protect. So he's better than Ben Carson. But that's like a really low bar. Like I can't actually like the floor stops my hand from going down far enough.
But you know, so like I said, I mean, you know, it's not much to choose from there. Sleepy Ben, no, just, you know.
Sleepy Ben.
Oh man. We're gonna get you into City Hall, Theo. Come hell or high water. You know how to fix this shit. We're gonna get you there.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's kind of you said.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was a great conversation. Thank you all for everything that you're doing out there. Check out We the Unhoused on SoundCloud and on YouTube. Theo, you're broadcasting several times a week. You are one productive man. And you're doing some really amazing work. Paisley, thank you for everything you're doing at Law 2. I'm sure we'll see you out there on the front line some more. Sure. Things are going to keep going, and it's up to us to protect us. And like folks like Paisley and folks like Theo can help get you active, get you pointed in the right direction. But ultimately, it's on us to get out of bed, get out there and make a difference.
100%.
Absolutely.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you very much, guys. Again, it was a joy to be here again.
Always. Yeah, that was so much fun.
Powerful.
Yes.
I'm like, can't believe it's nighttime.
Yeah. No, the as we get into the end of summer fall part and like it's still light at like 7 o'clock is throwing me off a little bit because like where did my summer go? It doesn't feel like there was a summer. So I don't know. I'm still like waiting like in you know a year and a half when we're finally all the way through COVID. We're gonna throw some really raging parties. Like there's gonna be a lot of pent up partying to get out.
A lot of block parties. And hopefully we'll all still be here in LA and not displaced by austerity politics. Fingers crossed. We're going to keep doing the work no matter who is in office.
No, November's gonna be a sea change if we do it right. And no matter what happens at the ballot box, like, we're not going away. Stay safe out there. Hopefully we'll see y'all out in the streets. There's plenty to be angry about, and there's plenty of stuff that we've got plenty of time to fix.
All right. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you, Rachel. Have a great night.
You too.